Chapter 9. Last Shadow. Even slipping our people in one by one over the years wouldn't work. The Amaya's systems might allow for a few dozen dark spots, but not almost 30,000. Circa 7 days, 19 hours, since the assassination of rebel leadership. Karuxi stopped his speeder a short walk from Last Shadow's mountain base. He stowed the long, slim vehicle under an outcrop that would keep it hidden from aircraft and auroras, then took a moment to simply admire Last Shadow's chosen locale. The high mountains of Oldatonga rose before him, piercing the blood-red sky with peaks high enough for snow to fall and give them brilliant white caps. The entrance to Last Shadow wasn't visible from his vantage, like most of their bases, but he knew where to look. Karuxi started toward one of the crags that cracked and split the rocky land, opening as it neared the base of the mountain. Ancient rains had likely carved out the crags, though they could have been split open after Irminthal's destruction. Karuxi shivered, thinking about that. He'd been on Darkside then, and had seen the worst of it. Here they'd only found a few fissures and cave-ins and some sections of old mining tunnels and lava tubes. He still didn't know how to feel about that. The goddess he had trusted and fought for had betrayed them, destroying the world and vanishing with no explanation just when it seemed they had a chance. Frowning, Karuxi tried to shove the thoughts from his mind and focus as he climbed down the wall into the hidden depression. It didn't work well. He knew that was part of the reason Estingai was so angry right now. She'd been outwardly worse after the destruction when they'd learned that Queshrima, not the God King or his armies, had destroyed Irmunthal. Now he believed she'd just learned to keep all that inside. She'd actually spoken with the goddess. He didn't know what Queshrima had said to her, but he imagined those words just made everything even worse than it already was. Stop it. Focus on this. Get it done as fast as possible so you can get back home. He worried about Uchantu. He knew she could handle leading the team, but neither of us do well when we're apart from one another. Karuxi shook his head, then took a deep breath and adjusted his bag before he headed toward the dark opening at the base of the mountain. That, at least, had been carved by Natari hands. It was an old iron mine from the days of the Iron Empire. Now that all the harmful, extremely useful metal had been cleared out of it, made a perfect hidden base, especially with the help of emerald aurorancers to move the stone around and reinforce the tunnels where needed. As Karuxi drew closer and saw no guards just inside the opening, he hesitated, brightening his clear notes. Still nothing. He frowned. Is this the wrong mine? It could just be a side entrance to the base rather than their main one. Or it could be a trap. Karuxi studied the opening, considering using his orange notes to check. That hadn't helped Estingai and her team, though. Taking a deep breath, Karuxi brightened his yellow nodes for luck and primed his gray nodes and blue nodes, just in case. He crept forward, silent, and found himself unimpeded as he entered the tunnel and continued deeper inside. Still, he didn't let himself grow too comfortable. The smooth rock walls picked up even the quietest sounds, so Karuxi brightened his gray nodes just enough to give him a bit better balance and finer control over his movements. Most people just use their gray nodes for strength or speed, depending on their heritage. But Karuxi's teachers had shown him that there was so much more to each ability. That careful tutelage brought Karuxi through the tunnel, silent as a bat, to a point where the harsh white of electric lights brightened the way ahead of him. Encouraged, Karuxi took off his mask and hung it at his waist. He might be recognized this way, but wearing a mask inside, especially as a Samyati, drew attention. Some from the older Yusanariti nations still insisted on it, but it was rare. Despite the lights, the minute of silence as Karuxi crept deeper into the tunnel put him on edge. He nearly considered turning back when the first echoes of conversation reached his ears. A faint smile tugged at his lips, and he continued forward, electric lights now humming above his head. Just as the smell of so many people living together hit his enhanced senses, Kruxi tensed as cold metal pressed against the nape of his neck. Identify yourself. Darkness. The voice was nearly a whisper, male, but his ears picked it up. Kruxi considered for a moment, then looked down to his boots and frowned. Darkness, I need to focus. You really let people get this far into your base before trying to stop them? Kruxi asked. The metal pressed a bit harder against Kruxi's skin, and this time he felt the edge. You'll find out just how much farther people make it if you don't identify yourself. Frowning, Kruxi took a deep breath. I'm turning around. The pressure of the knife on his neck lessened, but Kruxi still felt the cold blade against his skin as he turned. Facing back toward the entrance now, he found himself confronted by two guards in all black, masks covering their faces. One crouched in a carved alcove that had hidden him from Kruxi's vision as he crept through the tunnel. The figure was slight enough that they could have been a woman or just Natari, and leveled a rifle at Kruxi. The other stood before a matching alcove on the opposite side of the tunnel. Instead of holding a knife to Kruxi's throat, he held a rifle fitted with a serrated bayonet. Better for handling things in a tunnel like this where a rifle rapport could leave a ringing in the ears of everyone in a 100-meter radius for weeks at the least. Kruxi looked between the two guards, then glanced up toward his brow. That help you? He asked. There are only two of us left now. The guard cocked his head, then straightened, drawing his rifle back just a hair. Kruxi? Even as Kruxi nodded, smiling, the guard tensed again. You shouldn't have come here. Estingai is why I came here, Kruxi said, brightening his yellow nodes just enough that he hoped the guards wouldn't notice. He raised his voice as well, hoping it might carry to the tunnels beyond where people talked and milled about. She's done nothing but yell and bark orders at me since she returned, and I've had enough of it. Then why come here? The other, female, asked. Because I heard she's not Mihele's favorite person at the moment, Kruxi said, calling up the name of Vila's husband. I brought one of Frozen Phantom's speeders as a gift, and I'll do my part around the base. I just don't want to be Estingai's point man anymore. I'll fight if needed, but I want to be able to be me without worrying about taking care of everyone else. As the guards considered his words, Kruxi held back a frown. There was a bit of truth in what he'd said, which unsettled him. It was too close to what he'd berated Estingai for. I think you'll need to come with us, the male guard said after a moment. This is something Mihele will need to sign off on. Kruxi clenched his jaw. He needed more time before meeting with Mihele and the leadership. This would have him going in blind to something he could only have one good chance at. If he resisted, though, he wouldn't be able to approach the leadership as himself, which would make things considerably more difficult. As much as he wished it could be, returning to Wolfden wasn't an option either. He wanted to be back with Uchantu and even Estingai, but he didn't think he would be able to stand his sister's disappointment if he turned back so quickly. More than that, he needed to find out who was responsible for Sfamaku's death. Taking a moment to consider his response, Kruxi brightened his clear notes a bit further and looked at the two guards. Their uniforms were functional, but a bit rougher than what he was used to at Wolfden. The hints of clothing that stuck out from beneath their coats looked more worn as well. Is that because they don't have the resources for it? Or because of Vila and Mihele's leadership? Do you really need to bother Mihele with this now? Kruxi asked, smiling a bit and tugging at his clothes. I'd rather clean up a bit before I meet with him, as you can see. You're asking us to break protocol. Kruxi sighed. Look, I know what Mihele must be going through. I lost my brother, Sfamaku. Tell Mahele I'm here. I have no problem meeting with him, and it's not like I won't stand out here with my gemcrest. But just have him schedule a meeting on his time. It'll give us both a little time to relax. If you need someone to vouch for me, find Lysanda. She knows I'll keep my word. The male guard cocked his head again, and Kruxi brightened his luck notes just a hair more. The man sighed, then looked over his shoulder toward the other guard and nodded toward Kruxi. Watch him. He looked back toward Kruxi for a moment, then walked past him, further into the base. Kruxi barely kept himself from looking after the man. Instead, he leaned against the wall and looked at the woman. Sorry for being difficult earlier, he said, shooting her a half-smile. I haven't been in the greatest mood lately. The guard was silent for a moment, then gave a slow nod. A lot of that going around. Kruxi nodded, adopting a sympathetic expression. Silence stretched after that, though, and the guard lowered her rifle, but kept its barrel pointed toward Kruxi. When 3 pairs of footsteps finally sounded from the tunnel behind him, Kruxi grinned, then frowned, wondering who the third pair belonged to. That one stopped after a few seconds, though, and the other 2 continued their approach. When they drew close enough, Kruxi looked over his shoulder as the male guard walked forward with Lysanda. Kruxi's friend wore a dark uniform similar to the guard's in color and wear. She had dark blue Samyati skin and broad cheekbones characteristic of Kisuri, but no antlers due to her mixed parentage. Despite that, she was short even for a Samyati and as stocky as most Kisuri. Somehow, her small, pointed chin managed to fit with the rest of her, however. Her golden brown eyes were wide as she took in Kruxi, but her smile was so big it nearly made her thin lips disappear. For a moment, she looked like she was about to hug him, but then seemed to remember the guards. Please tell me you didn't get yourself into trouble. Kruxi snorted. Not on purpose, this time. He says he came here to get away from Estingai, the female guard said. That he just wants to do what's needed for the base to keep it running, but nothing more. He said you could vouch for him. Lysanda looked to Kruxi. That true? What happened between you 2? Kruxi hesitated. He didn't want to lie to his friend, but... Losing Svemaku, he said. It hit Estingai harder than I expected, and she wants too much from me. That wasn't entirely false, at least. That sounds like Estingai, Lysanda said, frowning. I needed to get away somewhere that she wouldn't be able to convince leadership to kick me out, he explained. Both Lysanda and the guard nodded, and Kruxi knew he'd convinced them. All right, the guard said. You can go. Just make sure to keep out of trouble, and you will still need to see Mahele. Kruxi smiled. Of course. Like I said, make an appointment for me. And remember the speeder. It shouldn't be too hard to find. I'll make sure people know it came from you, the guard said. And, sorry about the questioning before. You understand. Kruxi nodded. Of course. You did well enough to catch an Aurora-born off guard. That's impressive. Both guards stood a bit taller at that. And Kruxi pushed a little further. What are your names? The man put a hand to his chest, then thumbed over his shoulder. Ondala. She's a Kane. Kruxi smiled, nodding to both. Nice to meet you. When you get off duty, come find me. I'll get you a smoke or drink or whatever passes for that around here. Ondala laughed. Glad we asked some questions before pulling the trigger. I'll take you up on that. Me too, Akane added. Putting an arm around Lysanda, Kruxi turned back toward the base and walked off with his friend. So, you going to tell me why you're really here? I told them most of it, but let's wait till we're back at your bunk. You have some extra room for a friend, right? Lysanda sighed, reaching up to flick one of his antlers. That question would be much less annoying if you didn't have these. Kruxi grinned, and Lysanda rolled her eyes. Of course you can. You know that. Karuxi hugged her close. You're the best. Now, who's the friend you brought along? They turned a corner, and Lysandra gestured to a tall, very handsome Natari man with red-orange skin and spots on his cheek and jaw. From the way he smiled as he looked Karuxi up and down, Karuxi could tell Lysandra's friend was appreciating the view just as much as Karuxi did. Nomlana, Lysandra said. Karuxi, my friend Nomlana, Karuxi. He's going to be sharing my bunk for a bit. Nomlana grinned. Mine might be available too, if you play your cards right. Karuxi smiled back as Lysandra rolled her eyes.